Welcome. We're diving into the life and music of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, and we're going to focus on the more personal side of the composer.
His life was full of compelling twists and turns. It might surprise you to learn that music wasn't his initial calling. In fact, his early years were far removed from the world of symphony halls and opera houses.
Where did he begin then?
Picture young Nikolai. He grew up in a noble family, and his older brother Voin, a navigator and explorer, instilled in him a deep love for the sea.
Sounds like a scene from a classic novel.
It does, doesn't it? And that naval influence became a defining part of his life. He actually began his career as a naval officer serving in the Imperial Russian Navy.
Quite a contrast from the composer we know today.
Mm-hmm.
Did this naval career have an influence on his music?
Absolutely. His experiences at sea, the vastness of the ocean, and the rhythm of the waves all found their way into his compositions. His famous orchestral suite, Scheherazade, for example, is full of imagery and soundscapes evocative of the sea, a direct link back to his formative years.
It's amazing how seemingly disparate experiences can shape an artist. But it does seem that music wasn't his first love. What was his early exposure to music like?
It's interesting because his early exposure to music was rather limited. He composed primarily by ear, taking informal lessons here and there. It's almost as if his musical talent was just innate, bubbling beneath the surface.
That lack of formal training must have posed some challenges later on.
It did, and we'll revisit this point later as it played a crucial role in his development. But for now, let's move to a pivotal chapter, his entry into the world of the Five, a group of young Russian composers who were determined to break away from Western musical traditions.
I imagine it was a rebellious and exciting time.
So picture a young Rimsky-Korsakov meeting Mily Belyayev. He was the fiery leader of this group. Recognizing Rimsky-Korsakov's raw talent, Belyayev took him under his wing.
The impact of mentors can be so profound.
Indeed. Belyayev introduced him to the other members of the Five, Cesar Cui, Modest Mussorgsky, and Alexander Borodin. Together, they became a force in the Russian music scene, championing a distinctly nationalistic style.
Essentially, musical revolutionaries.
Precisely. They rejected traditional Western compositional methods and embraced Russian folk elements, weaving them into their music, creating a uniquely Russian sound. There are many fascinating stories from their time together. For example, when Rimsky-Korsakov and Mussorgsky lived together, they had a collaborative routine. Mussorgsky would compose at the piano in the mornings, and Rimsky-Korsakov would take over in the afternoons, working on orchestration and other tasks.
A testament to their dedication to their craft.
Their living arrangement and shared passion pushed them to new heights. They helped create some of the most important Russian music of that era. This period was undeniably crucial for Rimsky-Korsakov's growth. But the next chapter in his life brought a surprising twist, challenging his beliefs and forcing him to confront his own limitations.
This sounds intriguing. What happened?
At the incredibly young age of 27, he was appointed as a professor at the St. Petersburg Conservatory.
And that's where his lack of formal training comes back into play.
Exactly. Despite his growing reputation as a talented composer, he was essentially self-taught. Imagine the pressure he must have felt, stepping into this prestigious academic institution with limited theoretical knowledge.
It must have been daunting.
He was apprehensive, but Belyayev saw it as an opportunity. He believed that Rimsky-Korsakov could use this position to influence a new generation of musicians and spread the ideals of Russian nationalistic music.
So how did he respond to this challenge?
He embarked on a rigorous self-education program. He studied counterpoint, harmony, and all the theoretical aspects he had previously missed. He even devoted himself to mastering Western musical techniques, incorporating them into his own work.
This sounds like a significant shift in his perspective.
Yeah.
How did this newfound knowledge change his relationship with the Five?
It did, and we'll delve deeper into that in the next part. But for now, consider the internal conflict, a composer deeply rooted in Russian nationalism, now embracing the very techniques he once rejected.
That internal conflict is so fascinating. A staunch nationalist embracing the very techniques he initially opposed. What happened next?
It really is. While he became a strong advocate for academic training in music, which, understandably, unsettled some of his former comrades.
I can see why, considering they were all fighting for this unique Russian musical identity. His shift might have seemed like a betrayal.
The context is crucial here. Russia was experiencing this intense nationalistic fervor, and the Five were at the forefront of this movement musically. Rimsky-Korsakov's embrace of academic training seemingly placed him at odds with this movement he helped create.
And yet he never really abandoned his love for Russian folk elements, did he?
No, not at all. He actually found a way to integrate those elements with a more sophisticated, academically grounded approach to composition.
The delicate balancing act. How did his personal life factor into all of this?
In 1872, amidst all this upheaval, he married Nadezhda Purgold. She was a talented musician, a pianist, and a composer. She became his musical partner and critic, offering him invaluable support and feedback.
Sounds like a genuine partnership, both personally and professionally.
Oh, absolutely. Nadezhda played a key role in the creation of his early operas, and her influence is evident in the structure and musical ideas. She was a vital part of his creative process. So while he's facing criticism from his former colleagues, he has Nadezhda as this pillar of support, encouraging his exploration of these new techniques. But his professional life also takes another interesting turn during this period when he became the inspector of naval bands.
Back to the Navy. Did this role have any impact on his music?
It did. He took his duties very seriously. He traveled all over Russia inspecting bands, supervising bandmasters, and reviewing their repertoires. This experience proved invaluable to his orchestration skills. He gained this deep understanding of woodwind and brass instruments.
Essentially, he was conducting hands-on research for his future compositions.
That's a great way to put it. And he later shared this knowledge with his students, which cemented his reputation as a master of orchestration. We see a composer who started with very little formal training, embraces it fully, then utilizes a seemingly unrelated naval position to further refine his skills.
An unconventional path, to say the least. How did his fellow composers, especially the five, react to his changing style?
Reactions were mixed, as you can imagine. Some admired his growth and willingness to experiment, while others felt he'd strayed too far from their original vision. Remember, these were passionate artists, deeply invested in their beliefs about music, and Rimsky-Korsakov's evolving tastes led him to actually revise his older works, which didn't sit well with some.
He was essentially rewriting his own musical history.
In a way, he was. He believed he could improve his earlier compositions, incorporating his newfound knowledge and striving for greater technical perfection.
But didn't this clash with the spirit of the five, their emphasis on raw talent and instinct?
It did, and this tension led to a gradual drifting apart. Rimsky-Korsakov found himself increasingly drawn to a new circle of composers, one that embraced both nationalistic elements and strong academic foundations.
A new chapter, a shift in alliances, and artistic direction. Tell me more about this new circle.
Well, this group became known as the Belyayev Circle, named after their patron Mitrofan Belyayev. He was a wealthy industrialist who generously supported their work, recognizing their talent. He provided them with financial support, concert opportunities, and even a publishing house for their music.
A patron of the arts, always a welcome presence for struggling composers. Who were the key figures in this circle?
Alexander Glazunov, a brilliant young composer, was one of the central figures. Anatoly Lydov, known for his delicate and evocative orchestral pieces, was another prominent member. And of course, Rimsky-Korsakov, with his growing reputation, was kind of a guiding force for them. They all shared a passion for Russian music, and they recognized the importance of a solid academic grounding.
It sounds like a dynamic and supportive environment. Did this merging of styles result in some fascinating music?
Absolutely. Rimsky-Korsakov flourished during this period. He composed some of his most famous orchestral works, including Scheherazade, Capriccio Espagnol, and the Russian Easter Overture. These pieces showcase his brilliant orchestration skills and his ability to weave together Russian folk elements with this more sophisticated compositional technique. But even with this success, a complex relationship continued to influence his relationship with Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky,
Yeah.
the other giant of Russian music. I imagine there was some rivalry between them.
Tchaikovsky represented, I think, the more traditional Western-influenced school of Russian music, whereas Rimsky-Korsakov, even with his academic training, was still seen as a champion of the nationalistic style. They were musical opposites, yet both achieved immense success.
It speaks to the richness and diversity of Russian music during that era. But how did Rimsky-Korsakov view Tchaikovsky's success?
He both admired it and envied it. There are accounts of him feeling uneasy when Tchaikovsky's music was praised by members of the Belyayev Circle, the very group he was mentoring. He respected Tchaikovsky's talent, but perhaps felt a bit overshadowed by his fame.
It reminds us that even great artists are human, with all the complexities that come with that.
Exactly. And this complexity deepens when we consider the next chapter in Rimsky-Korsakov's life, a period of renewed creative struggles and a deepening fascination with the operas of Richard Wagner.
Wagner, the master of German opera. How did his music impact Rimsky-Korsakov?
Well, in 1889, he attended a performance of Wagner's The Ring Cycle, and it profoundly affected him. He was captivated by Wagner's innovative use of the orchestra, his ability to create these vast, immersive musical worlds.
It seems that this experience sparked something new within him.
It did. From this point onward, Rimsky-Korsakov focused almost entirely on composing operas. During his later years, he composed some of his most enduring operas, including Christmas Eve and The Golden Cockerel. These works are full of rich orchestration, dramatic storytelling, and the unmistakable influence of Wagner.
Wagner was a German composer. How did this align with Rimsky-Korsakov's dedication to Russian music?
Well, he adapted Wagnerian techniques to his own unique style. He was creating operas that were both Russian in spirit and innovative in their musical approach.
So he wasn't imitating Wagner, he was forging his own path, drawing inspiration while maintaining his distinct voice.
Exactly. He was a composer in constant evolution, always seeking new ways to express himself, even if it meant drawing from these seemingly disparate sources. His later years, though, were also marked by personal and political turmoil. The 1905 revolution, with its social unrest and calls for change, deeply affected him.
He was living through immense upheaval, a time when art and politics often collided.
As a lifelong liberal, he found himself caught in the crossfire. He openly supported student protests at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, which led to his dismissal from his professorship.
Imagine the courage it took to stand up for his beliefs, especially in such a volatile environment.
It was a risky move, but he felt it was his moral duty to speak out against injustice. And, the public outcry over his dismissal led to his reinstatement, but the experience definitely left a mark on him. And his opera, The Golden Cockerel, written during this period, is seen as a veiled critique of the Tsarist regime and its policies.
So even in his later years, he was pushing boundaries, using his art to comment on the world around him. It's been a fascinating journey exploring the life of this complex and brilliant composer, from his naval beginnings to his embrace of academic training to his complex relationships with his fellow composers and his unwavering dedication to Russian music. Rimsky-Korsakov's story is really a testament to the power of passion, perseverance, and artistic evolution. What are your final thoughts?
I think his story reminds us that limitations, whether perceived or real, can often be catalysts for growth. He could easily remain content with his innate talent, but instead he challenged himself, embraced academic training that enriched his musical vocabulary. And we see this continual push and pull between his love for Russian folk traditions and his fascination with Western musical techniques.
A constant balancing act leading to a unique musical voice.
It did. Perhaps his initial lack of formal training allowed him to approach music with a certain freedom, unburdened by the rigid rules that can sometimes stifle creativity.
A fascinating thought. It is intriguing to consider that his early limitations might have been a blessing in disguise, fostering a unique musical perspective.
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it? Perhaps that freedom allowed him to infuse his music with those distinctive folk elements, those unconventional harmonies, something that a strictly trained musician might have shied away from. But when he embraced formal training, it wasn't a rejection of his earlier style, but more of an expansion of his tools. He was refining those raw instincts, adding layers of complexity and sophistication without sacrificing the unique character of his music.
A fusion of inherent talent and dedicated learning.
Precisely. And that combination is what makes his music so captivating. This freshness, this vibrancy from those early untutored years, coupled with this depth and mastery that reflects his later academic pursuits.
A testament to his constant evolution and his willingness to always challenge himself. How did this evolution influence future generations of Russian composers?
Well, his willingness to experiment and blend different influences really shaped his impact on future generations. I think he paved the way for this new approach to Russian music, one that embraced folk traditions, but also embraced the possibilities of Western compositional techniques. Composers like Igor Stravinsky, Sergei Prokofiev, and Dmitri Shostakovich, all titans of 20th century music, drew inspiration from his work. They took his innovations and pushed them even further, creating music rooted in Russian tradition, yet strikingly modern.
So he served as a bridge between the past and the future of Russian music.
In many ways, he did. He carried the torch from composers like Glinka and Belyayev, infused it with his unique vision, and then passed it on to a new generation who would go on to redefine the entire landscape of Russian music. His legacy resonates with audiences even today.
What a remarkable journey. From naval officer to self-taught composer to champion of academic training to a musical revolutionary who bridged tradition and innovation.
As you listen to his music, the shimmering beauty of Scheherazade or the dramatic power of the Golden Cockerel, remember the man behind those notes. The sailor with the secret passion, driven by a thirst for knowledge, a willingness to experiment, and this profound connection to his roots.
His story is a great reminder that artistic boundaries are meant to be explored and redefined.
And it leaves us with a question to ponder. How do you think his unique journey, with its contradictions and triumphs, continues to inspire us today? In a world where the very definition of art is constantly evolving.